Good morning. Thank you for coming to visit with us again this morning. I'm still under the dentist care and having to keep my mask on because of my dental work. And it'll be a couple of more months before I'm finished with this, so bear with me with the mask. Thank you all for visiting with us, and we're continuing our studies in the book of Esther with the main subject being the providential care of God for his people. And today we're in chapter 4, and we will be focusing on Esther being put in the place of queen for such a time as this. And what they will be doing is talking about fasting and praying to the God of heaven, even though God's name is not mentioned in this book. His providence is. And so we will look at fasting from the Jewish perspective, but in order to really learn the fast that God receives, then we'll have to look at Isaiah chapter 58. But in looking at that, fasting is the complete abstinence of self-will and self-effort. Is totally depending on God for the outcome of whatever situation we find ourselves in. And with this being true, we read in Esther chapter 4 these words. When Mordecai perceived, or when he understood all that was done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst or the middle of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. So when Mordecai understood what Haman the Agagite had determined, and what he had gotten permission from the king, then Mordecai ran out of the inside the gate to the outside of the gate and threw his hands up with tears and mourning and put on sackcloth and ashes. And this was the way he was expressing his heartbreak and disappointment over what was about to happen to him and his people. And verse 2 said, and came even before the king's gate. And he came, this was outside the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. So he would not be able to go inside the gate of the palace covered with sackcloth and ashes. Verse 3, in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So when this report came abroad, the people were so upset that they began crying out and weeping and demonstrating that by laying in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 4, So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. So they came and told Esther what was going on with her first cousin and the people of the land. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved. She became upset, and she sent clothing or raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. In other words, she didn't know exactly what was going on, and so when she got the news, she sent clothing so that Mordecai would be able to enter back into the king's gate and to take away whatever was bothering him. So verse 5 says, Then called Esther for Hattash, one of the king's chamberlains, who he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So she gave this man who had been appointed to take care of her a commandment to go to her first cousin and find out what was going on. Verse 6, So Hattash went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city. He too went outside the city gate to where Mordecai was, which was before the king's gate. So reading verse 6 again. So Hattash went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasures for the Jews to destroy them. So now this man Hattash is going to be able to go back to Esther and tell her why Mordecai was behaving as he was. Verse 8. Also Mordecai gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them. He gave him this to show it unto Esther and to explain or to declare it unto her and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him and to make requests before him for her people. So now Esther is being commanded by Mordecai to, once she finds out all this information, to go in to King Ahasuerus and let him know the plot that Haman had cooked up to destroy the people of Israel. And verse 9 says, And Hattash came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. So after he tells her that, verse 10 says, Again Esther spake unto Hattash and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. So this is a conversation through an intercessor between Esther and Mordecai. Verse 11 says, this is what Esther is sending to Mordecai. She says to him, All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death. The only exception would be, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. Unless the king he will see who's in the inner court, and unless he hold out the golden scepter, there's but one law, that that person could die. But if he held out the golden scepter, then that person would be able to enter and approach the king. So, reading the last part of verse 11, which says, except such to whom the king hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. Then she says, but I, even though I'm queen, have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. So there had been a full month since the last time Esther was called before the king. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. That's verse 12. Verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. See, now this is their back and forth with each other. Mordecai says to Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Don't think just because you're a queen, you got to remember that you're a Jew too. And what's going to happen to the rest of the people can happen to you. So don't even think to yourself that you're going to escape in the king's house. Verse 14. Mordecai still talking to Esther through her messenger. Verse 14, for if you altogether holdest that peace at this time, then shall their enlargement or their rescue and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He's believing that through the providence of God and God's provision, if Esther don't do what she's been asked to do, God is still going to provide a way of escape for the Jewish people. And 1 Corinthians 10:13, I'm reminded that we're told as believers that there is no testing or temptation that has taken us, but that which is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow us to be tempted above that we're able, but will, with the temptation, also make a way of escape that we may be able to bear it. So Mordecai is thinking in that principle when he sends this message to Esther. And he goes on to say, but you, thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And then the big question, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom of Persia for such a time as this? How do you know that through divine intervention that God did not set you up to be queen so that you could intercede in this matter. Verse 15, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. This is what Esther's decision is made to tell Mordecai. Verse 16, go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. Don't eat or drink anything for 3 days, night or day. And this is what Esther told Mordecai through her maidens and Hatash, to tell him, I'm going to do it, but you all need to fast and pray for me. And then she says, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So she made the decision through the mediary of her first cousin, who had raised her like he would have his own daughter, to go in to the king. And she decided that if I'm gonna die because of this, then I'm gonna die. And verse 17 says, so Mordecai went his way. He was satisfied at Esther's answer, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So he went to those Jews that was in Shushan the palace and got them to agree that they would fast and pray for Esther 3 days and 3 nights. Neither would they eat or drink anything for those 3 days. And by doing that, they're saying fasting is not only doing without food and drink, it's also seeking God to come to our rescue in this time of great need, because if he does not, then we're going to perish along with Esther, who was also a Jew. So that's the conclusion of chapter 4 in the book of Esther. And next time we will go to chapter 5 and continue throughout to chapter 10 from the book of Esther. And as we go through these pages of scripture, we're seeing God's providence, or God providing for his people in times of much trouble, and how the enemy will take every opportunity and use whatever person he can to steal, kill, and destroy God's people. So we'll continue next week, and thank you all for listening. Remember, my email address is bjt1125@yahoo.com. And be sure to look at my other videos on my other channels. I maybe not name all of them, but you can type in the book of Matthew, the book of Proverbs, the book of Hosea, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the book of Nahum and Malachi, the book of Ruth, and I think I said Hosea already. So you all please take time to look at those videos. There are many, so I know you have more to do than to look at my videos, but I need your prayers and your encouragement. So thank you all for listening, and let me hear from you. Bye.